Banters. Welcome back to Broche Banter. I'm your host, Julie Gill, and we're here to talk today about pointe work. Pointe for adults. I have this as its own whole separate facet of ballet because pointe is such a specific and specialized skill, taking just as long to master as all the other details and facets of ballet. We're going to really take this in a funnel approach from the very top of the funnel, people curious about pointe, all the way to the very bottom of the funnel, people serious about pointe. We're going to go through high-level curiosity questions. We're going to talk about what it takes to get ready for pointe. We're going to talk about what happens once you're actually up on pointe. And we're going to talk about all kinds of adult-specific mindset and body issues and challenges and successes that we tend to see and find within pointe for adults. When it comes to pointe for adults, one of the biggest questions that people have in the beginning is it even possible to go on pointe as an adult if you didn't do it as a kid? Now, I think a big reason why people wonder about this is just because of the shape of the feet and how they look in the pointe shoes. And people believe that if you are going to be able to get on pointe, that you had to sort of mangle your feet as a child when the feet were still malleable. And you can sort of mold them into the shape of the pointe shoes. And once you get to be an adult, if you didn't mold your feet in that way, then you're not able to go on pointe. So I think this is sort of the root of the question of if you can go on pointe as an adult. This is not exactly true. This is not exactly true. The shape of the feet, if you do pointe as a kid, of course, your feet are going to change quite a bit differently than if you start pointe as an adult. However, for most adults, they can go on pointe even if they didn't start as a child. The shape of the feet, the shape of the ankles, a lot of this stuff is still somewhat malleable as an adult, while the actual shape of the bones themselves doesn't change too much. The tissues between the bones, the muscles around, and the shape of the foot can change. There's so much sort of empty space within your feet that aren't just the bones that you can change and manipulate and work on as an adult if you didn't do it as a child. How long does it take is another interesting question. I get people reaching out to me all the time saying things like, oh, it'll probably take me 10 or 20 years to get ready for it. Or on the other hand, you sometimes get people who think that you can't start ballet without pointe shoes. And you get people who think the opposite, that all ballet training is done in pointe shoes, which is a very reasonable misconception, right? Because all we see from especially women on stage is them in pointe shoes. So you assume that they're training in pointe shoes and that you will show up to class in pointe shoes. I remember one time I was in an open class in New York City, taking class there. It was a beginner level class, and some lady came to the class for the very first time wearing pointe shoes. She had never done ballet before. It was her first class, but she thought she was supposed to wear pointe shoes. So she came wearing pointe shoes. I don't know where she got them. I didn't ask her for all the details, but I remember my teacher just sort of flying off the handle and just being somewhat horrified that she had come to class in the pointe shoes. And, in the one sense, I understand that teacher's perspective. It's really dangerous. She doesn't want to be liable. If you just have never done ballet before and you put pointe shoes on, they can be a little bit dangerous. But on the other hand, the dancer's perspective, the one who came in for the first time, it would make perfect sense to wear pointe shoes because that's what you see dancers wear. So you'd think you have to go get pointe shoes. So anyways, it's a very interesting range of time that people believe it takes to get on pointe, ranging from you should be on pointe your first day of ballet all the way until people thinking it'll take them 10, 20 years to be able to get ready for pointe. So how long does it take is a really interesting question to talk about. I am going to talk about it in just a little bit when I talk a bit more about getting ready for pointe. There's not an exact direct answer, just like there's not an exact direct answer for how long anything takes generally in life, but I'll break down some of the nuances that'll kind of give you an idea of how long it takes to get on pointe. Another two more questions that people get kind of on the high level are, does it mess up your feet? Does it make your feet look super ugly? Does it hurt them? Do you get injured? Is it damaging? And this question is a very interesting one because you do kind of hear about dancers' feet. You see pictures online of people with blisters and bleeding and cuts and messed up feet and all of that. And so there's a couple of things to think about with this. Number one, pointe shoes a long time ago used to be a lot different. They used to be a lot different material. We didn't have as much technology. We hadn't invented as much. They were new. Any new product is bad. It's first iterations, right? It improves over time. Everything is getting, we learn more about it. We learn more about how to keep people safe and healthy, and careers get longer, and the shoes have improved a lot since a long time ago. So people who are in my classes who maybe were on Pointe, they're maybe in their 60s and they were on Pointe, 45 or 50 years ago, they will have these horrific memories of it being so incredibly painful, just being a horrible, horrible experience. And then when they do work back up to Pointe in their 60s, they'll report back that it's a much better experience, a much more positive experience, and that their feet don't hurt nearly as much as when they were a child. The shoes have come really, really far, where you should, if you're doing Pointe work for 30 minutes to an hour in a given day, you're not expecting to get blisters, you're not expecting to tear up your feet, you're not expecting to leave class bleeding. It does occasionally happen. Sometimes you get a bruised toenail, sometimes you do get these things that happen, but it's not the expected norm. Like, you don't want to be feeling this all the time. But Pointe work does hurt. And it doesn't hurt. It's uncomfortable, like a tight pair of shoes can be uncomfortable, but it shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't be so painful that it makes you want to quit or makes you want to cry or feel like you're messing up your feet. It shouldn't have like a stabbing or a shooting or a friction rubbing type of a pain. They're uncomfortable. I'm not going to lie. It's not like, it feels like something to be up on your toes, especially for a long period of time, but it's not like painful. And these days it shouldn't be damaging. The padding and the shoe technology have improved a lot, where yes, you're definitely going to get calluses. Yes, your feet are going to get a little bit hardened from the shoes, but it shouldn't be messing up your feet. It shouldn't be causing you massive bunions. It shouldn't be giving you blisters. You shouldn't be bleeding in your Pointe shoes. And then the last question that I get is a curiosity about men going on Pointe. Feet of men can be very similar to the feet of women. The shape of the foot doesn't have much to do with your gender. Men can have arched feet and flat feet just the same way as women. The strength goals, the mobility goals, everything is the same for men going on Pointe versus women going on Pointe. It's possible, in the same way. It requires the same amount of hard work, the same amount of work stretching your feet, working on your ballet technique, working on your strength for men as it does women. It is a possibility for men to go on Pointe just as it is for women. So let's move down the funnel a little bit and talk about getting ready for Pointe. So as I said in the beginning, the dear soul who showed up to the ballet class with the Pointe shoes on the very first day. This is not how we get ready for Pointe. We don't show up to ballet class in Pointe shoes. In fact, Pointe class doesn't even replace ballet class. Once you do get your Pointe shoes, Pointe class is a separate class, generally speaking. It's a separate class where you learn how to operate the shoes. You do special specific exercises to learn how to use the shoes, to learn how to use your toes, to learn how to control the shoes, to learn all the things that you were doing in regular ballet class, but in a totally new and different context. So Pointe class actually, like let's say you're going to ballet class 3 times a week, Pointe class would not replace one of those. It would be additional on top of that, a special Pointe class to help you understand how to use the shoes and strengthen specifically. So what goes into getting ready for Pointe? So I break it down into 4 main areas. Number 1, your ankle alignment and strength. Number 2, your toe dexterity and independence. Number 3, your ankle and demi-pointe range of motion. And number 4, your ballet technique and strength overall. All of this assumes that you are generally healthy, no injuries, that you have dense bones. We have to worry about, sort of osteoporosis, osteopenia type of a thing as we get into our older age. We have to be careful with bone density. We want to make sure we are having no active injuries in the ankles or the feet. But assuming all of that, the 4 areas we're going to dive into right now. So when we think about ankle alignment and strength, when we're up on our Pointe shoes, when we're standing up on our toes, the alignment of our ankle matters a lot, way more than it matters on your demi-pointe or on flat, although it does definitely matter there too, and good alignment on demi-pointe will lead you to good alignment on Pointe. However, for safety and for success in your Pointe shoes, the alignment of your ankle matters a lot. Now on demi-pointe, you are working on lining your ankle up between your big toe and your second toe. You want to think about your arch pushing out over your second toe and your big toe to really create that line of stability. A natural human foot, especially with a shorter pinky toe, is going to naturally sickle the feet and naturally rise up with all 5 toes equally touching the floor, which is not the alignment we want for ballet class. For ballet class, we want our big toe and our second toe taking the majority of our weight, and the pinky toe, for a lot of us, is either barely touching the ground or not touching the ground at all, depending on how long or short it is. So it's not necessarily the natural way that a person would stand on their tiptoes to reach into the cabinet for a jar of peanut butter, but it is, of course, the way that we want to use our feet for ballet. That's our demi-point alignment. We want to also work on our ankle alignment when we are standing on flat, so making sure we're not pronating. We have the pinky toe down on the floor. We have a nice, what we call, I guess, tripod foot, 3 points, under the big toe, under the pinky, under the heel, really equally pressing on the floor for stability. We want to make sure we have that good alignment standing flat to show the arch strength and support, and the support up the lower parts of the legs. We want, when we point the feet, to have good ankle alignment. This means that when you point, that you have basically an equivalent amount of energy from the outside of the ankle to the inside of the ankle. A lot of times, if we are pointing our feet with too much energy on the inside, the arch, and on the inside of the foot, we get that sickle shape. Now, when we're up on point, we do have to point our feet pretty hard when we're standing on point, when we're going up on point. And if our muscle firing pattern has the inside of the ankle pushing more than the outside, we'll end up in a sickle shape in our point shoes when we're working really hard to get up there. So we want to make sure that our ankle alignment pointing and flexing is very straight, with the shin bone lined up with the big toe and second toe, not with the shin bone lined up with the third and the fourth toe. This is, again, somewhat unnatural. A natural foot, if you ask them to point, will slightly pull in towards the sickle direction, because the sickle direction is a stronger feeling point than the wing direction. The wing direction is a weaker point than the sickle direction. So if you tell somebody to point their feet really hard without any training, they will almost always naturally sickle their feet. It takes this control and development to activate the outside, the everters on the ankle, the outside of the shin, to be able to pull the pinky toe line to the side and create that winged shape that we need for strong and correctly aligned ankles for point work. Now, another interesting part of ankle alignment and strength is basically strength of the top of the foot. This is little talked about in point work, but I find it to be extremely important. To be able to come off of point, you really need to be able to create a flexing motion with your toes and your ankles that is very smooth and strong. So in my point readiness evaluations, watching how the dancer flexes their foot from pointing is actually a huge indicator to me of the stability of their ankle. So as you're flexing, if your foot is not stable, you will see the dancer's foot ever so slightly jittering from side to side as they flex the foot. This really indicates that the flexing action as we roll down from point is going to be a little wobbly and is going to be potentially unsafe. Rolling down from point is one of the more dangerous parts of point. If you're rolling down, especially from one leg, you want to make sure that you're really well supported with your ankle. And so watching that flexing motion, a really smooth pathway for the ankle in the flexing direction, is a surprising, but I find necessary indicator for ankle alignment and strength. So that was number 1, the ankles. Number 2, let's keep going down. Let's talk about the toes. We need to make sure that our toes can move and articulate independent of the ankle. What I mean by this is that the relationship of your heel to your calf will stay completely still in a pointed place while your toes can flex and point by themselves. That your heel is not unlocking from your calf, that you're really keeping your arch stable and still while your toes articulate independently. Number 2, that as you point your toes, you have a little bit of a toe spread between the 3/4 to the full point, that your toes are not overlapping on their way, that they're not cramping each other's style, that they are also having just a little bit of space between each other to show good mobility through that front transverse arch and to show good dexterity that you'll need to use and press against the sides of your point shoes for good stability. Now, toes pointing long and curved and not scrunched and curled under. This is a really, really tough one to explain, and actually it is one of my most popular YouTube videos with tens of thousands of views on my demo and explanation of the difference between long curved pointed toes and scrunched toes. Basically, the It's hard to describe audibly over a podcast. So if you want to see the visual demonstration, go to Broche Ballet YouTube channel and look up pointing toes and you'll find the quick, it's about 5 minutes video there. But what I want you to imagine is that as your toes go from flex to point, the correct thing to do is that your toes stay straight while they descend closer to the ground, and then they curve at the very end. Now, somebody who has scrunched and curled toes, oftentimes the toe will curl while they're still facing up, while the toes are still flexed, the toes will curl and then point after having curled. So we want to have the toes more straight during the pointing action and curve at the end versus curling and tucking back first and then pointing after. This is really helpful and necessary for being able to operate your pointe shoes and using your toes to push up through the demi-pointe all the way onto the full point. Also, under the toes, you want to make sure that you are using your toes on demi-pointe, that you have nice straight toes on demi-pointe and that your toes are not scrunching back to try to hold you up, that they're long and pushing into the floor, thinking about underneath that second toe knuckle pressing onto the floor to give you support and strength. Number 3. Ankle and demi-pointe range of motion. Now, this is one where we have a bit of wiggle room with the range of motion, but it can be very stubborn to change the range of motion here with the ankles. We want to make sure that we're able to bend the toes and the ankles enough to be able to get all the way up onto point. This is what you'll hear as the pencil test, where you put a pencil across the top of your ankle and make sure that it can sit straight. This is one that requires a lot of patience and a lot of, let's say, faith that you can make a change here in this area, because the way to make the change in the ankle and the demi-pointe range is a lot of work with both massaging, gentle stretching, and strengthening. It's a trifecta of things to make this change in your range of motion of your ankles and your feet. A lot of us have, as we're coming to ballet as adults, if we didn't have childhood training, we've all lived very different lives. We've all worn different shoes. We've all done different activities in the past that will affect our ankle and our demi-pointe range. Some people have more naturally flexible feet and won't need to worry about this. Those people really need to worry about, number 1, ankle alignment and strength, because they're at very high risk of injury from wobbly ankles. If you are in the camp where you need to work on improving your range of motion, then that is going to be your number 1 focus, and really working on opening up the feet, creating motion within the tissues of the feet, and creating the movement in the ankle and the foot that you need. Now, where I find people tend to have the stiffest feet and the most tight feet is either we spent a lot of time in very tight constrictive shoes. Maybe we had a job where we had to wear high heels for a while. Maybe we had started wearing very tight shoes very young. Maybe we've been a runner in the past and our feet have taken a lot of impact over time and have tightened up as a response. Maybe we're a horseback rider. Maybe we were a gymnast or an ice skater, where these are very high impact activities and your feet can really get very, very tight from these activities. I see people coming to me who have history of those types of activities, who tend to have a very tight and stiff ankle and foot. The tissues around the ankle, the tissues around the arches really stiffen up to try to support your foot and keep your foot together, which is a very natural protective mechanism. So what we need to do to be able to actually make change in those tissues and be able to make change in the tightness of the feet is that trifecta that I was saying: the massage to break up the tissues, gentle stretching to create more length in the tissues, and also strength so that you can actually support the new range of motion. If you're not working strength as well while you're trying to change your range of motion, then you're going to be missing the strength required at the end range to be able to actually use that range in an active way. So if all you do is stretch your foot into a new position, but you don't work on strengthening there, then it's actually not going to quite be ready for point in that state. And you need to do all 3. You need to do massaging with, there's so many techniques online, whether it's a ball, a massage gun, or a manual therapist, a physical therapist, or someone of that sort to help you break up that tissue. Gentle stretching and strengthening exercises, really to continue to improve this range. Now, this can take quite a while, especially if the tightness in the foot is very long standing. If you've had tight ankles for quite a long time, this can take a while to make enough change in the range of motion to be ready for point work. So that's why I say if you are in this particular camp, it requires a good amount of dedication and faith and belief and recommitting to your why on a regular basis to be able to keep going, keep massaging, keep stretching, keep strengthening through a long range of time, maybe a year or so, to be able to make the change in your ankles and your arches. Number 4, ballet technique and strength. Before I go on to number 4, back to number 3 for just 1 second. I just want to say the last thing I have the very amazing and unique privilege of being able to see so many adults embarking on this journey, so many adults going on this journey of trying to change their range of motion in their feet to be able to get up on point. I've seen it happen. I've seen it done. I've seen people able to make real meaningful change in the shape of their arches and in their feet to be able to go on point after a lot of hard work. So I hope you, if you are in this boat and you're working on your range of motion, that you will keep working, that you'll be consistent with your massaging, that you'll do 10 minutes every single day, that you'll put in the work to loosen up your feet and your ankles to get you up onto point. Okay, now I go on to number 4. I didn't want to leave you hanging on number 3 there. Ballet technique and strength. You might think ballet technique would be number 1, but I actually put it as number 4 here because I see all of these other 3 areas as they're not independent from your ballet technique, but they kind of are. They are very specific types of exercises and movements that ballet class itself often does not change so quickly as if you were to focus on these 3 areas on your own, or if you have the luxury of going to a pre-point class, where if you are working on changing how your toes point, if you're working on changing your range of motion, if you're working on changing your demi-point alignment, if you're working on changing how your feet point, this is pretty hard to actually make the change within your regular ballet class where there's so much other stuff going on. You're wearing ballet slippers, so you can't really see your toes. You're just trying to stay up there for long enough to balance on releve passe. So these 3 areas I really see as things that you can work quite independently, and this is exactly why I say that everybody who has dreams of going on point should start working on all 3 of these areas the same day that they start working on their ballet technique and strength. If you want to go on point and you're starting ballet or you're new to ballet, all 3 of the areas that I just mentioned are all areas that any person can work on. You don't even need to be in the ballet studio to work on these things. In fact, everybody should work on loosening up their feet so that they can have a better balance, less likelihood of sprained ankles, so that they can be more comfortable standing on their feet for long periods of time. Everybody, these exercises and stretches for the first 3 things that I talked about are exercises that are often given out for physical therapy for people who aren't even dancers. So all 3 of those can be started to work on from the beginning of your ballet journey. Let's say it takes you a few years to develop the technique and strength to be ready for point, but then you haven't spent any time yet working on your demi-point range. Let's say it takes you a year to just get your demi-point range to where it needs to be. Now you have 4 years to go on point, versus if you had started your demi-point range earlier in the process, you could be doing that in parallel with your ballet technique and strength and be ready for point when your ballet technique has reached the place where you're ready for point. So that's why I say work on the 3 components: the range of motion, the strength and alignment, and the toe dexterity, starting from the beginning. That's why I say pre-point classes, especially the way that I teach them, are available for everybody from your first day of ballet. It all takes a while to develop, so if you have the goal, get started with both in parallel. So ballet technique, number 4, ballet knowledge and consistent class. Here's the deal. When you put point shoes on, basically you can't think anymore. They're so all-consuming that when you put them on, basically you're going to forget what a pas de bourrée is. You're going to have so much more you have to think about. Your feet are feeling so different. It kind of feels like when you put shoes on a dog for the first time and they forgot how to walk. So you really need to have a strong and solid ballet knowledge. You need the terminology to be like the back of your hand. You need to be very comfortable in a ballet class setting. You need to be going consistently so that you're strong and you're ready for it. So you really need to have a good base. For a lot of people, that's between 1 and 3 years, depending on how frequently they're going, how many gaps they're having, how many weeks they're taking off, etc. But that's usually at 1 to 3 years of ballet time to be ready for point with all of the knowledge, the technique, all of that stuff. And then within strength, you want to really focus on a couple of key areas. Number 1 is your core and posture. If you can't hold your body still and you're trying to stand on top of a pair of stilts, it's going to be very wobbly, it's going to be very scary, and you won't find too much success when you get up on pointe. This is a big thing, very difficult for us as adults, very, very challenging to develop, especially if you've had pregnancies or C-sections where we tend to lose a lot of the core. Even just living your life, the core is a very difficult thing to maintain. So focusing on the core and alignment and stability is a big part of being ready for pointe to be able to control your body. Hip and turnout control is the second of 3 areas. If you can't hold your turnout on demi-pointe, then once you get a pair of satin pointe shoes on that are very slippery, your turnout will disappear from you immediately in your pointe shoes because the shoes are very slippery. There's no friction from the ground to help you hold your turnout. So it's very important that you can hold your turnout, that you can be strong in your hips while you're doing releve passé, while you're doing turns, while you're doing jumps, that you can really hold and control your turnout so that you can actually operate your pointe shoes. And then the last area is a really strong plie technique and being able to balance after a plie releve. Why this is important: if your plie has a pronounced hip hinge where you're leaning forward in your plies, then when you do get up to pointe shoes, this is going to throw you back so far in your shoes that it's going to be very hard for you to ever leave the bar with your pointe work. So having a really strong plie releve technique, that you go straight up and down, that your hips are in good control, that you have power from turned out position in plie, and that you can balance once you get to the top. So basically everything on flat and demi-pointe is going to translate to your pointe shoes. So if you can't do a plie releve passé to demi-pointe, then it's going to be even harder when you do get in your pointe shoes to be able to go all the way up, even farther, all the way up to the tip of the shoes. So with all of that together, those are the 4 areas of pointe readiness that I look at and think about when it comes to getting ready for pointe. Now, when it comes to kids, there's a whole other host of things like the maturity level and bone density and all of that stuff. That is not where I specialize. So if you're a kid listening to this, or if you're a parent wondering about how this works for your kid, there's a whole other host of things to think about with children. I didn't even mention studio rules or class levels or anything along those sorts. So if you are listening to this on behalf of a child, let's say this is partial because there's additional factors that you need to factor in with kids. How long all of this takes, let's just wrap up that question before we talk about actually once you're on pointe and what that journey is like. So how long this takes for somebody who is starting ballet from kind of an average fitness level, from kind of an average level of coordination with their body, average level of flexibility, you might be looking at 1 to 2 years of 2 to 3 times a week of ballet class with pre-pointe, specific pre-pointe for the 3 areas that I mentioned for the pre-pointe: the ankles, the toes, the range of motion. That's kind of your average case. I have seen it happen more quickly than that, especially if somebody has childhood training where they have some technical knowledge already in their body and that they remember. I have seen it happen more quickly if somebody is really aggressive with their timeline and they're going to class 5-6 times a week from the very beginning. I have seen it happen in as quickly as about 9 months, being able to get up onto pointe and be successful up there. I consider success that they kept going, they're able to leave the bar, they're able to do the pointe work in the timeline that you would expect for somebody learning pointe, that they didn't get injured. That's a huge part of the success. And then I've seen people take much longer than that, especially when you are working on dealing with either very hypermobile ankles and feet, where we need to focus so much on strength and alignment, or if you're dealing with very tight ankles and feet, where we have to focus a lot on the range of motion of the ankles and the demi-pointe. And then, of course, if you are taking a lot of breaks from ballet, if you tend to be on again, off again, then it can take a little while longer to build up the strength and control that you need in your body to get up on pointe. All of that being said, the time it takes is super individual and really depends on where you're starting from, how much you're putting into it now, and how aggressive you are with your work to get up onto pointe. How my pointe program works, twice a year I open up a group of people who learn pointe with me on Zoom. The purpose of this Pointe class is to get people up to speed so that if they have a class locally where they are that offers Pointe but not for beginners, that they can learn all the basic footwork of Pointe. They can learn it safely. They can learn it from the beginning with all the details about how to use your feet in the shoes. They can work up to releve passé. They can work up to échappé, to pas de bourrée, to piqué sous-sus, to bourrée, to all of the basic footwork that you need to be able to be successful in a in-person Pointe class if your school doesn't offer beginner Pointe for adults. This program, people who've been in my program have gone on to perform in their Pointe shoes on stage, landing pirouettes on Pointe through my online Zoom classes, and much, much more. So the path for people getting on Pointe here at Broche is very strong and is a great funnel for getting people from the beginning through the pre-Pointe journey, through your consultation and application, all the way up onto Pointe and to success out in the world beyond. That leads me to what happens once you get up on Pointe. So getting up on Pointe is often such an interesting journey for adults. How kids learn Pointe is very different from how adults learn Pointe. One thing I find really funny about kids learning Pointe is you give kids a pair of Pointe shoes and the first thing they're doing is piqué turns down their hallway at home. They're trying fouettes, they're trying pirouettes, they're trying everything they know. They got their shoes, they're super excited. But when you give an adult a pair of Pointe shoes, maybe you're an exception to this, but I've met very few exceptions to this. When you give the adult a pair of Pointe shoes, they'll show up to class and they'll stand on flat for the entire time until you personally invite them to step up onto Pointe. They don't go up onto Pointe to just play around. They're often very timid and very afraid and just cautious, let's say, is maybe even a better word. Just cautious that they are going to be careful, that they're going to learn it correctly, that they're going to be safe, that they're going to be able to walk to work tomorrow, that they're not going to hurt themselves. So when it comes to adults learning Pointe, we really have to take that mindset into account, take that sort of fear into account, take that emotional experience into account, that we are actually supporting their journey onto Pointe and supporting them in a different way than kids need supported. I find it funny that a lot of studios have policies, kids studios have policies where the kids have to leave their Pointe shoes at the studio. They can't take them home because the teachers are afraid they're going to just be maniacs in their Pointe shoes. I have yet to see this be too much of an issue with any of the adults learning Pointe who I have met and worked with, where they're often just so conscientious and so cautious and so careful with their bodies and their feet, almost to a fault. To be honest. But that is such a different experience than learning as a kid, where you're kind of trying to rein them in, trying to teach them slowly. The adults crave going slowly. They crave the feeling of safety while they're learning Pointe. They need it. They have lives they have to live. They need to take care of their kids. They need to go to work. They really can't afford an injury. I mean, not that a kid can either, but you know what I mean. We're a little more careful with our bodies at this point. We have a little different relationship with our bodies. So when it comes to getting up onto Pointe as an adult, a lot of adults, and this is how I learned too, on your first day, you're doing échappés. On your first day, you're doing relevés up onto one leg. And that's just when you're in that boat of being worried. And especially if you don't have a lot of physical tolerance to, weird sensations in your body. If you get dizzy really easily, if you don't like the feeling of turbulence, if you don't like the feeling of spinning, and then you're up on one leg on Pointe, it can be really unnerving. It can be really scary. And so to just toss people into the deep end, maybe even leaving the bar in the first class, for an adult, this method doesn't work for most of us. Maybe it works for the kids, but it certainly doesn't work for most of us as adults. So we really have to go into the details of what should your toes be doing inside the shoes? What should the shoes feel like on your foot? What should your arches be doing? What should your ribbons feel like? How do you roll up? How do you roll down? How do you manipulate the shoe? How do you take care of your shoes? How do you use your toes to create stability, power, and stillness in your Pointe shoes? We really need to go through all of the details of exactly how to use the Pointe shoes week by week, step by step, to make sure that everybody's feeling comfortable and confident in their Pointe shoes. I will say also that this was really surprising to me. It really wasn't surprising once I thought about it, but it was surprising to me at first that Pointe is actually a huge drop-off point for people in ballet. Some people will start Pointe and either they got on Pointe too early and they weren't actually ready yet, or they get onto Pointe and they see how hard it's going to be and they get a feel for that it's kind of like a whole new journey. I've got this as a whole facet of ballet. It's like really starting a whole new journey from scratch. People who've had a lifelong dream of Pointe, sometimes when they get the Pointe shoes, it can be a little bit of a letdown. Or it can be disappointing in that it might feel like so much work that they thought that once they got Pointe shoes, it would feel a certain way, or that they'd be flying across the stage in their shoes, or that things would be easier once they got their Pointe shoes. But actually they find that it's quite harder when they get their Pointe shoes. Or like I said, maybe they got on Pointe too early, or they got fit in some really bad shoes and they had a bad experience, where people can, really quickly relegate themselves to like, well, I'm not made for Pointe. My feet aren't made for Pointe. My body's not made for Pointe. This isn't for me. I'm not going to be able to do this. This is too much work. I'm not going to be able to make this happen. I even experienced, this is why it wasn't that surprising once I thought about it, was I experienced this too when I started Pointe. If you guys follow me on Instagram, I have pretty archy feet. I have what you'd call banana feet. And I thought in the beginning that Pointe was not made for me and my feet because I had so much trouble with my shoes. I couldn't roll down. I was constantly stuck up on Pointe. I didn't know about the necessity of having strong flexing action in the ankles to come down. I didn't know about so many things when I started Pointe work. And so I thought my feet weren't made for Pointe, which if you see how my feet look, you think that's crazy because my feet are kind of, they look like how you think all feet should look when you see Pointe shoes. But they were so hard for me to use that I thought Pointe wasn't for me. And I thought, oh, I have to give this up. And I did stop Pointe a few times because of that discouragement. So as an adult starting Pointe work, because we can often come into ballet with so much doubt already on whether we can do it or whether our feet are going to be right for it or whatever, sometimes these setbacks can feel like, oh, I knew it, this wasn't going to work. Or like, I knew it, this wasn't, I wasn't going to be able to be able to do this. So if you happen to be one of those people in that part of your Pointe journey, I hope you'll give it another try. I hope you'll try a different pair of shoes. I hope you'll try a different approach. I hope you'll go back to those 4 areas of readiness that I mentioned in the beginning. And you'll really scrutinize and study where you are in your Pointe journey and see and start asking yourself, how can Pointe be for me? How can my body be for these Pointe shoes? How can I make this work for me? If you really have the dream of it, don't let Pointe be your drop-off point. It's a huge drop-off point. We lose a lot of people in ballet once they get on Pointe. Some settle back into soft shoes and just kind of think well, this is good enough for me. I don't need Pointe. But some leave ballet altogether and you don't see them around so much anymore. So if you're in that place of discouragement, I hope you'll seek answers. I hope you'll keep trying. I hope you won't let Pointe be a drop off for you or the reason why you give up on your ballet dreams. So I hope you'll keep going with it and I hope you'll keep trying. The last point I want to make here is putting everything together with your Pointe work. Now, as an adult, I call it the Pointe panic. We have, especially if you don't have much tolerance, like I said, to physical sensations. Like I'm the same way. I don't like being car sick. I get car sick really easy. I don't like being dizzy. I hate turbulence on planes. I don't like the feeling of my body being a little bit out of control. And so Pointe work can feel super scary. Letting go of the bar can take a long time. Working on different movements in your Pointe shoes can take a long time. So if you're in that boat, focus on creating stillness in your body, on creating stillness in your shoes, in your hips, in your spine, in your back, on more and more and more strength and control of your body, so that when you do push up to your points, when you do work towards your Pointe work, that your body is not loosey-goosey and that you're really holding yourself tight and together. Just imagine if you were walking on a pair of stilts, if you had a pair of stilts that you'd see at the circus, would you want to be loosey-goosey up there on top of those stilts, or would you want to be super, super tight and super strong and really hold your stomach? You probably wouldn't even breathe if you were up on those stilts because you'd be holding yourself so tight. I'm not advocating not breathing in your Pointe shoes, but I'm just saying, if you're in a place of Pointe panic, which is so normal for adults learning Pointe, it's so normal, it's so part of it for us learning Pointe, then focus on stability, on control, on strength, on everything up and down the chain of your body to make sure that you're really setting your body up for good, strong, and solid Pointe work to help you make that transition from getting off the bar. You don't have to push yourself past where feels comfortable. As you start getting comfortable, you'll just get curious about what would happen if you let go a little bit. It'll start building naturally if you focus in on those areas of strength, control, learning how your shoes work, learning how the whole system works. It'll continue to develop naturally as you keep working and growing over the first couple of years of your Pointe journey. The biggest thing, the last point I'll say on putting together your pointe work, the last thing I'll say about pointe work is that your goal with pointe work, in addition to having a really still and controllable body, is to be able to manipulate your shoes with your feet the same way you can manipulate your shoes with your hands. So you can bend your pointe shoes with your hands. Can you bend your pointe shoes with your feet? Can you get to demi-pointe with your toes and not just with the help of gravity? Can you roll up to pointe with the strength of your feet and not just snapping onto the shank? Can you actually change the shape of your pointe shoes with your feet, your arches, and your toes? If you can do that, if you own your demi-pointe, if you really own the shape of that shank, don't let your shank make any shape that you didn't ask it to make. Don't let your shank snap into pointe. Don't let your shank fall into demi-pointe. Keep your shank in your control. Keep your shoe in the control of your feet. That is how you continue to build your pointe technique. That's how you continue to feel safer and safer off the bar. That's how you continue to get more and more power and strength in your shoes. You always want to think your feet are the boss of the shoes and not vice versa. So keep working those shoes. Think about the shoes as something that your feet are controlling, not vice versa. All of that continues to develop over time, but that is the crux of what I teach to my adults in pointe class to really help them feel safe, confident, and successful up on pointe. So to wrap it all up, if you are anywhere on your pointe journey, whether from curious to serious, I hope this episode helps fuel your fire to get to work on the 4 areas of readiness. If you're already on pointe, I hope this fuels you to either get a new fitting or just keep working on your strength, control, stamina, and personal tolerance for risk-taking off of the bar. I hope it'll give you the gumption to keep working on controlling your shoes with your feet, and I hope you keep dancing. I hope you keep having fun with your pointe shoes. Go take some beautiful pictures with your pointe shoes on, and as always, I wish you a very happy dancing. Until the next time, I'm Julie Gill. This has been Broche Banter.